Lisa Whitmore believed her privilege made her untouchable. When she saw a black man take a parking spot she wanted, she spewed vile racism, mocked his service to the country, and belittled his very existence. But words weren't enough for her. She punched him across the face, convinced he wouldn't dare fight back. But what she didn't know was that he was a Navy SEAL, a man trained to face real threats, not fragile egos. The moment he refused to bow to her rage, she screamed for her husband, expecting him to put the black man in his place. But when Brad charged in with blind aggression, he learned the hard way that fists don't win fights. Skill does. Lisa Whitmore thought she could hit a black Navy SEAL and walk away. Instead, she was about to learn a valuable lesson in the consequences of your own actions. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. Jalen Bennett had long since mastered the art of patience. It wasn't just something he had learned in the military. It was something he had lived, whether in training, in combat, or just navigating the world as a black man in America. He knew restraint was as much a survival skill as it was a discipline. Words could be weapons, but silence, when wielded correctly, could be sharper. That was why, when the car horn blared behind him, short and sharp, with the unmistakable edge of entitlement, he didn't react immediately. He had just pulled into the parking space, had barely even shifted into park when he saw the SUV behind him, angled slightly, as if its driver had intended to take the spot for themselves. He sighed, knowing before even looking who was behind the wheel. Through the rear-view mirror, he caught a glimpse of her. Mid-40s, platinum blonde bob, oversized sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown. Mouth already twisted into a sneer. He recognized the type instantly. The kind who believed the world revolved around her. The kind who had never been told no. Jalen flexed his fingers on the steering wheel, inhaling deeply. He had no interest in arguing with someone over a parking spot. If she had been waiting, she should have signaled. If she had signaled, he would have seen her. She hadn't. End of story. Or at least it should have been. But as soon as he stepped out of his car, she was there, moving toward him with sharp, clipped steps, her heels clicking against the pavement like the slow tick of a countdown. "Excuse me," she snapped, voice high and sharp, the tone of someone who had never considered that the world might not cater to her. "That was my spot." Jalen shut his door, turned to face her fully, and took a moment before answering. "Didn't see your name on it." Her expression twisted further, lips pressing into a thin, tight line. "I was clearly about to park there." "Didn't see a signal," he replied evenly. His voice calm, measured. "Plenty of other spots open." "That is not the point," she huffed, folding her arms, her entire stance shifting into something confrontational, something stubborn. "The point is, you people think you can just take whatever you want without consequences." And there it was. Jalen's jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second, but he forced himself to relax it, exhaling slowly through his nose. He could walk away. It wasn't worth it. Not her, not this. But then she kept going. "This is the problem with this country," she continued, gesturing vaguely as if she were speaking on some grand societal injustice rather than a mundane parking dispute. "You move into places you don't belong. You act like you own everything, and then you expect the rest of us to just sit back and let it happen." Jalen stared at her for a long, silent beat. He had encountered people like her before, the ones who masked their bile under the guise of self-righteousness, the ones who truly believed they were the victims in their own twisted worldview. But he had never once let people like her decide how he carried himself. So when he finally spoke, his voice was even controlled. "Lady, I parked in an open space. That's all that happened here." "No," she snapped, stepping closer, voice dripping with venom. "What happened here is another entitled thug thinking the rules don't apply. And don't look at me like that. I'm not afraid to say it. People like you are ruining this country. Jalan could have laughed at the sheer audacity of it. But he didn't. He just exhaled again, tilting his head slightly as he studied her, taking in the way she stood, the way her fingers twitched as if she were daring him to give her an excuse to escalate this into something more. He wasn't going to give her that. You don't know anything about me, he said simply, turning to walk away. Her laughter followed him, shrill and full of mockery. Oh, please. Let me guess. Let me guess. You're a good one, right, served in the military. Think that makes you special? He stopped slowly, deliberately, he turned back to face her. I bled for this country, he said, voice steady, eyes locked onto hers. And people like you don't get to tell me I don't belong in it. For the first time, she hesitated. It was brief, just the flicker of something unreadable across her face. But it was there. And then just as quickly she recovered, straightening her spine, rolling her eyes. Oh, cry me a river. The military is a joke. What? You think that makes you better than me? Newsflash. It doesn't. You don't deserve any special treatment just because you chose to go play soldier. Jalan felt the heat creeping up his neck, but he kept his breathing steady. He had heard insults before. Had endured far worse in places where men didn't just hurl words, they hurled bullets. But something about this woman, about her complete and utter confidence in her own ignorance, made his fingers twitch at his sides, and she saw it. That smug, satisfied look flickered across her face like she had won something, like she had found the exact thing that would get a reaction out of him. And that was when he knew she wasn't going to stop. I bet you think you're tough, she said, taking another step closer. Close enough that he could see the way her pupils flared, the way her lips curled around the words. Bet you think you're some kind of hero. Let me tell you something, she poked him in the chest, sharp, insistent. Once, twice. My husband, she continued, voice dropping into something lower, something edged with pure malice, is going to teach you a lesson when he gets here. Jalan stared at her, unblinking. There it was, the escalation, the threat. She wasn't done. He could see it in the way her breath was quickening, in the way her hands twitched. She was building towards something, feeding off her own hate, twisting herself into something reckless, something dangerous. And Jalan, who had spent his entire adult life learning how to measure risk, knew that this wasn't going to end here. Not with her, not with people like her. Not today. Jalan had spent years training for conflict, learning when to act and when to hold back, mastering the ability to read a situation before it spiraled into something uncontrollable. He could see it happening now. Lisa Whitmar, red-faced and shaking, wasn't just angry about the parking spot anymore. That had been the excuse, the flimsy opening to let loose something deeper, something ugly that had probably been brewing long before she ever laid eyes on him today. And now she wasn't just spewing words. She was building herself up to something bigger. He had seen it before. The way people like her needed a reason, a justification, something to cling to so they could convince themselves they were in the right even as they crossed the line. But he wasn't going to make it easy for her. Jalan shifted his weight, his stance loose but solid, arms still relaxed at his sides. His voice when he spoke remained controlled. Let me make sure I understand this. You're mad because I parked in an open spot. You're mad because you didn't get it first, and instead of just finding another one like a normal person, you're standing here throwing a tantrum, talking about how people like me are ruining the country. Lisa's eyes flared. But he kept going, stepping into her anger before she had a chance to twist it into something else. People like me, he repeated, voice measured. What does that even mean exactly? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I parked my car. Got out and minded my business while you're the one standing in a parking lot shouting like you're about to have an aneurysm. A flicker of something crossed her face. Not hesitation, but irritation at being forced to say the quiet part out loud. Jalan knew the type. They liked their bigotry disguised, shrouded in plausible deniability. They wanted to be able to say it without really saying it, to feel superior without ever being held accountable. Lisa straightened, smoothing out her blouse as if adjusting her composure. "Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Everywhere you turn, the world's getting worse because of them. Crime's out of control. Cities are falling apart, and hard-working people like me are the ones paying the price." Jalan let out a slow breath, his patience thinning at the edges. "You mean people like me? A Navy SEAL who served in more countries than you can probably name? A man who spent over a decade putting his life on the line while you sat in an air-conditioned house complaining about how hard your life is?" She stiffened, and he could see the exact moment the realization hit that she had miscalculated, that whatever image she had constructed of him didn't match the reality standing in front of her, but she wasn't backing down. "Not yet." "Oh, please," she scoffed, waving him off like he had said something ridiculous. "You want a medal? What? You think serving makes you special? Makes you better than me?" Jalan held her gaze unwavering. "No," he said, "it just means I don't take freedom for granted. I fought for this country." "What have you done for it?" For a moment, Lisa didn't answer. She just glared, breathing heavier now, her hands balling into fists at her sides. Then she laughed, sharp, bitter. "The military is a joke. All of you, just a bunch of government pawns pretending you're heroes. You're not fighting for freedom. You're fighting for paychecks. That did it?" Jalan had endured a lot in his life. He had been called names, had been underestimated, had walked into situations knowing people saw his skin before they saw the man. He had learned to let most of it roll off his back. But this was different, not because she was insulting him, but because she was mocking the men and women who had sacrificed everything. His friends, his brothers and sisters in arms, the ones who had never made it home. His jaw tightened, his breath slower now, deeper, steadying. "You know what's funny," he said, voice lower, quieter. "You're standing here talking about who does and doesn't belong in this country. Who deserves what? But the only person acting entitled is you. You think this parking spot was yours because why? Because you wanted it? You think I should have just moved because you said so? You think people should step aside for you just because you exist?" Lisa's face was turning red now. Her lips pursed so tightly they nearly disappeared. "I don't know what world you think you live in," Jalan continued. "But the one we're in right now. It doesn't belong to you. And I'm not moving just because you don't like it." Lisa's breathing had turned shallow. Her entire body wound tight. The shift happened so fast he saw it before it even happened. The moment her rage outpaced her reason. The moment her mind decided that words weren't enough. Her hand snapped up, fingers curled, and then crack. The slap landed against his cheek, sharp and sudden, sending a ripple of shock through the watching crowd. A few gasps rang out, and for a moment the entire world seemed to pause. Jalan didn't move. Didn't flinch. He simply stood there, his cheek stinging, his pulse steady, his mind processing every possible response in the span of a breath. Lisa's chest was rising and falling rapidly, her hands trembling as if she herself couldn't quite believe she had done it. But when she saw that he wasn't reacting, wasn't lashing out, wasn't doing what she probably expected, her expression twisted into something victorious. "Yeah," she breathed, her voice thick with misplaced satisfaction. "That's what I thought." Jalan exhaled slowly, his fingers flexing at his sides as he looked at her. "Really?" Looked at her. And then, calm as ever, he spoke. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. She blinked, the smugness faltering for just a moment. Jalan didn't move, didn't step toward her, didn't raise his voice, didn't even break his stance. But something in the way he said it, the certainty, the quiet finality of it, sent a flicker of something new across her face. Doubt just for a second. Then just as quickly, it was gone. Buried beneath the anger she clung to like armor. Just wait until my husband gets here, she spat, stepping back, her confidence returning. He's going to tear you apart. Jalan tilted his head slightly, watching her, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, and Lisa Whitmore had no idea just how much trouble she had just walked herself into. Jalan exhaled slowly, keeping his stance firm, his cheek still stinging from the slap, but his temper locked beneath layers of discipline his patience had been tested before. Far worse than this. He had faced threats in foreign countries, had been under fire, had seen the worst humanity had to offer, but somehow moments like this still managed to scratch at the edge of his control. He had given Lisa Whitmore every chance to walk away. She had chosen violence. Jalan adjusted his posture slightly, rolling his shoulders as he studied her, his face calm, unreadable. The satisfaction in her eyes told him everything. She thought she had won. She thought that slap had cemented her victory, that she had reduced him to nothing more than a man who had to take it, had to stand there and accept her rage because she had convinced herself of her own superiority. She had no idea how badly she had just miscalculated. Jalan tilted his head, watching the way she squared her shoulders, preparing for another round. Thinking she still had control over the situation, he let a beat of silence stretch between them, letting the tension settle thick in the air before he finally spoke. His voice low, steady, and unwavering. "You're going to apologize," he said, each word deliberate. "You're going to take a deep breath, recognize that you made a mistake, and you're going to walk away because I promise you, if you don't, you're going to regret it." Lisa's lips curled, her breath hitching slightly as her face darkened with fury. "Regret it," she spat, her voice shrill, incredulous, laced with an almost manic disbelief that someone like him would dare speak to her like that. "Oh, I don't think so. You don't tell me what to do. You don't get to threaten me. I am not sorry." The last words came out in a shriek, her entire body shaking with unfiltered rage. Jalan didn't move, didn't blink. He just held her gaze, steady as ever. Then she lunged, her hands came at him, wild and reckless, nails clawing, fists swinging. Jalan shifted smoothly, sidestepping, watching as she stumbled forward when her attack met nothing but air. The second swing came immediately after a slap aimed at his face, but he saw it coming before she even committed to it. He leaned back just enough for her palm to miss by inches, watching as her own momentum threw her slightly off balance. She was undisciplined, untrained, attacking out of pure emotional chaos rather than strategy or control. It was almost laughable how ineffective she was. If it weren't for the fact that she was so blinded by rage, she might have realized just how foolish she looked. The third attack came, a wild, flailing attempt to strike at his chest. And this time, Jalan lifted his arm, blocking effortlessly, his forearm absorbing the impact without so much as a flinch. The fourth and fifth strikes followed immediately after. One aimed for his stomach, the other at his shoulder. Jalan stepped back smoothly, evading, his expression almost bored now, as if this entire thing was more of a nuisance than an actual threat. Lisa's breathing was ragged now, her hands trembling from exertion, her face blotchy with rage and humiliation. She had expected a reaction, a retreat, a raised voice, a moment where she could play the victim. She had wanted him to lash out, to lose control, so she could justify everything she had said, everything she had done. Jalan hadn't given her that. And that was what made her snap. "Fight me," she screamed, her voice cracking. Stop standing there like a coward and fight me. Jalan clenched his jaw, finally fed up. The next time she swung, he caught her wrist. The moment his fingers closed around her, she froze. Her breath stalling, her eyes going wide. Jalan didn't squeeze, didn't twist, didn't apply any unnecessary force. He simply held her still, stopping her in place, stopping her from continuing this ridiculous, pathetic display of aggression. Lisa struggled, yanking at her arm. But his grip was like iron, immovable and unyielding. "Let go of me," she shrieked, twisting, fighting against the impossibility of the situation. Because in that moment, for the first time, she realized she had lost. Jalan leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice, making sure only she could hear it. "I'm done letting you take swings at me," he murmured. "You want to act like a rabid dog, but now you're crying the second you realize you can't win. I told you to walk away. This is on you." Lisa's chest heaved, her lips trembling. And then she crumbled. She let out a gasping, shaky sob, her body going slack, the rage melting into something pitiful and pathetic as she suddenly switched roles in the blink of an eye. "Help!" she screamed, her voice thick with hysterics now, eyes darting around, looking for someone, anyone, to come to her aid. "He's hurting me. Somebody help me." Jalan immediately let go, stepping back, hands raised in a show of non-aggression, his expression calm, but tired now, because he had expected this. He should have known she'd do it. People like her always did. The woman who had been slapping, clawing, and screaming just seconds ago was now a damsel in distress, playing to the crowd, choking on her own fake tears, her voice shaking with the effort of making herself the victim. Jalan didn't move, didn't flinch as her performance continued. He knew better than to argue, better than to try and convince anyone watching that the woman sobbing in the parking lot had just been attacking him moments before. He simply stood there, letting her dig her own grave. The murmurs of the crowd rippled around them. Some people looked unsure. Others kept their phones up, still recording, the evidence capturing everything. The slap, the attacks, the moment he had restrained her without ever hurting her. Lisa turned, desperate now, her eyes wild, looking for someone, anyone to step in, to defend her, to make sure this moment didn't end with her looking weak and pathetic. And then she saw him, her husband. Jalan barely had time to react before the doors of the shopping center swung open and Brad Whitmore stepped outside. Tall, broad, built like the high school athlete he once was, but carried the weight of a man who hadn't done anything impressive since. His eyes locked onto his wife. Then Jalan, then back again. Lisa let out a wail, throwing herself toward Brad like she was running from a burning building, grabbing his arm, clinging to him, immediately sobbing into his chest. Brad's eyes darkened as his hands closed around her shoulders. His entire body tensing, his expression shifting from confusion to rage in an instant. And just like that, Jalan knew this wasn't over. Jalan had dealt with threats before. He had heard the insults, the slurs, the posturing of weak men who thought volume and aggression could compensate for their lack of ability. He had been in situations where hostility burned hot in the air, where words had turned to violence, where the difference between walking away and throwing the first punch could mean the difference between life and death. And yet somehow this felt more ridiculous than any of them. Brad Whitmore stood in front of him now, a man who looked like he had once been something. Broad shoulders, thick arms, the build of an athlete whose best days were behind him, but who still carried himself like he was the biggest threat in any room. The weight of time had softened him, but he still walked like he had never lost a fight, like he still believed his size alone would be enough to make someone back down. Lisa clung to his arm, her sobs manufactured, her entire body trembling with the sheer force of her performance. She clutched at him like she was a helpless victim who had barely escaped with her life. Her fingers digging into his sleeve as she whispered something to him. Something just quiet enough that Jalin couldn't hear. Brad's eyes, already dark with brewing anger, flicked up to Jalin, then narrowed, and then, as expected, he went straight for the racist playbook. "Thugs like you," he spat, his voice dripping with disgust, his posture shifting as he squared his shoulders, his chest puffing out like some kind of posturing animal. "You think you can go around putting your hands on women and just get away with it? You people don't know your place? You think just because society lets you run wild, there aren't going to be any consequences? Well, guess what?" He took a step closer, his hands clenching into fists at his sides, his nostrils flaring. "I am your consequence." Jalin almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he just tilted his head slightly, studying the man in front of him. The way his muscles tensed like a coiled spring, the way his breathing had picked up. The way he was doing everything in his power to make himself seem bigger, meaner, tougher. It was pathetic. "Let me get this straight," Jalin said, voice impossibly calm. "Your wife attacked me multiple times. You show up late, don't know a damn thing about what actually happened, and now you think you're some kind of hero." Lisa let out a hysterical gasp, her fingers tightening around Brad's arm. "He's lying," she shrieked, her voice cracking with the sheer force of her outrage. "He grabbed me." Jalin let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "There are cameras, lady. People were recording. You really think anyone's going to believe you?" Lisa's mouth opened, then snapped shut, her eyes darting around, searching for the bystanders, her panic flaring just for a moment before she doubled down. Brad, however, had already made up his mind. "I don't need a damn video to tell me what happened." His voice was lower now, his hands curling tighter, his breathing heavier. "I know what guys like you are. You're all the same. Just a bunch of violent no good." Jalin didn't need to hear the rest. He saw it happen before it even started. The way Brad shifted his weight, the slight bend in his knees, the telegraphed rage, bleeding into his movements, before his body even committed to them. Then he charged. Jalin didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't tense. He just waited. Brad came in fast, aiming high. His right arm swinging in a wide, reckless arc, his face contorted with rage. It was sloppy, full of blind aggression, fueled by arrogance and ignorance, the kind of attack that worked on a man who didn't know how to fight, who might panic under the weight of the moment. Jalin wasn't that man. At the last second, he shifted his head slightly, letting the punch sail past his face, missing by inches. Brad stumbled forward, thrown off balance by the sheer force of his own wasted momentum. Jalin barely even moved. Brad swung again. This time, Jalin stepped to the side, smooth as water, his body fluid, effortless, making it look like Brad was fighting a ghost. The crowd gasped. Lisa screamed something unintelligible and jumped into the fray, her nails flashing as she lunged at Jalin's face like a wild animal. Jalin sighed, pivoted, and let her trip over herself. She landed hard on the pavement, her scream turning into a sharp cry of pain, her knee scraping against the asphalt as her palm smacked the ground. Brad, still furious, still too stupid to realize he was outmatched, went for a third attempt, throwing a wild haymaker with everything he had. Big mistake. Jalin saw his opening. He stepped inside Brad's swing, cut the space between them in half, and planted a fist clean into the man's ribs. The air rushed out of Brad's lungs in a strangled wheeze. His body buckled. Jalin could have ended it there. Could have let Brad crumple and humiliate himself in front of everyone. But then Brad did something he really shouldn't have. Still gasping for breath, still bent over, his face twisted in agony, he spat out one last thing. Something vile. Something so steeped in hatred that even the crowd recoiled. Jalin didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. He swung. The punch landed flush against Brad's jaw. A perfect clean hit, delivered with precise force and intention. Brad's head snapped to the side. His body followed. He crumpled to the pavement in one motion, his legs giving out, his consciousness disappearing before he even hit the ground. Silence for a full second. The entire world seemed to freeze. Then Lisa shrieked. It was a sound so high-pitched, so full of rage and disbelief that it cut through the stunned quiet like a blade. She scrambled to Brad's unconscious form, shaking his shoulders, her hands grasping at his face, screaming his name over and over again. Jalin exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders, adjusting his posture. The crowd cheered. Not everyone, but enough. Enough for Lisa to whip around, her face twisted with absolute fury, her mouth opening to say something, anything to try and twist this into something else. Jalin just looked at her, calm, unshaken. Jalin stood still, his breathing steady, shoulders relaxed, posture perfectly at ease. Despite the storm still raging in front of him, the weight of the punch was already gone from his fist. His training ensuring that he didn't dwell on the action itself. Only the result. Brad Whitmore lay sprawled on the pavement, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. The deep, unconscious breaths of a man whose body had given up long before his pride ever would. Lisa was still shrieking, her hands pawing at her husband's face, shaking his shoulders, rocking him as if she could force him back to consciousness through sheer desperation. Her breath came in frantic, heaving gasps, her face a blotchy mess of rage and disbelief. Her entire body trembling as the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. Jalin didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched, and so did the crowd. Phones were still up, people whispering to each other in hushed, amazed tones, some muttering curses under their breath, others openly smirking. As Lisa continued her performance, the weight of witnesses settled over the scene like an unshakable force. Proof that no amount of screaming, no amount of theatrics was going to change what had just happened. Lisa finally stopped rocking Brad. Her movements slowing, her gaze darting wildly across the gathered faces, her mind racing for a way out. Her breath hitched, her fingers curling into fists as she turned slowly, deliberately toward Jalin. And then, like a switch flipping, her entire demeanor changed. "You," she gasped, voice shaking, thick with manufactured fear. She pushed herself up from the ground, staggering to her feet, one hand still clutching Brad's limp arm. "You're a monster," Jalin raised a brow, unimpressed. The crowd didn't buy it either. "Lady, your husband ran at him first." Someone muttered, "You both attacked him. What did you think was going to happen?" Lisa's head snapped toward the voice, eyes wild, but the murmurs were growing now. People nodding, shaking their heads at her like she was a bad actress in a poorly written play. She licked her lips, panic flashing across her face before she doubled down, planting herself between Jalin and her still unconscious husband. "He assaulted us," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at him. He tried to kill Brad." The laughter came quick and sharp from somewhere in the back of the crowd. "Yeah, 'cause it sure looked like he barely broke a sweat while your man swung like a drunk in a bar fight." Lisa's face burned red, her nails digging into her palms as she whipped around to check on Brad, as if hoping the sight of his crumpled form would be enough to sway the growing skeptical audience back to her side. And then with a low, pained groan, Brad started to stir. Lisa gasped, dropping to her knees, grabbing his face, patting his cheek, desperate to pull him back into the moment. His eyelids fluttered, unfocused at first, and then he winced, lifting a shaky hand to his already swelling jaw. Jalin watched, silent as Brad blinked, his mind sluggishly catching up to what had just happened. The memory of it all came flooding back in real time. The charge, the swings, the miss after miss after miss. And then blackness. And now here he was on the ground, defeated, publicly humiliated. The second his gaze found Jalan, it burned with hate. "You son of a..." His words were a low snarl. His voice wrecked with pain. But Lisa was already pulling at his arms, helping him sit up, whispering hurried words into his ear that Jalan didn't need to hear to understand. She was trying to rebuild the story before he was fully back, trying to frame it, shape it, mold it into something they could live with. But Brad wasn't listening. His pride was already seething, his anger swelling, his humiliation consuming him whole. He shoved Lisa off, forcing himself to his feet. Swaying for a brief moment before finding his balance, his fists clenched at his sides, his eyes locked onto Jalan with pure, unfiltered hate. "Think you're tough," he snarled, voice thick with something dangerous, something bitter. "Think you can just do whatever the hell you want? You think this is over?" Jalan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Lisa grabbed at Brad's sleeve, whispering something again. Urgent this time, her nails digging into his arm. Brad barely looked at her. Instead, he looked at Jalan's car. The second Jalan saw it, he already knew what was about to happen. Brad wrenched free from Lisa's grip, stumbled 2 steps toward the pavement. Then his eyes landed on a rock. A jagged, heavy chunk of asphalt, broken from the edge of the parking lot, sitting just within reach. Before anyone could react, Brad bent down, grabbed it, and hurled it. Jalan watched it happen. But it wasn't until the impact that he truly processed what he had done. Crash! The rock slammed against the windshield, shattering it instantly. The sound was deafening. Glass spiderweb out in a violent explosion of cracks. Shards slipping from the impact point like fractured ice. Jalan's breath caught. He had expected him to throw it, but he hadn't expected it to actually land. For the first time, he felt something other than control, something like rage, something like real genuine anger. His hands clenched, his jaw tightened, his pulse quickened. He forced himself to breathe, to slow it down, to lock it away before it did something for him. Lisa screamed at Brad, panic finally cutting through her arrogance. "We have to go now." Brad hesitated just for a second. Then, like the coward he was, he turned and ran. Lisa followed, her heels slapping against the pavement, dragging Brad toward their SUV. Jalan just stood there, still staring at his car, his brain catching up to the damage, to the sharp splinters of glass still trickling down onto the hood. Engines revved, tires screeched. The SUV peeled out of the lot, speeding away, disappearing down the road in a desperate attempt to escape the mess they had just made. The silence that followed was thick. The weight of the damage still settling. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice finally spoke up. "You going to let them just get away with that?" Jalan slowly turned his head, looking back at the shattered glass, the deep, ugly scar across the vehicle he had paid for with his own hard-earned money. His fingers flexed, his shoulders squared, his mind made up in an instant. Then, just as slowly, he looked back up at the road where they had disappeared. Jalan stood there for a long moment, his mind catching up to the weight of what had just happened. His car, his hard-earned, paid in full, meticulously maintained car, was sitting there with a spiderweb of shattered glass stretched across the windshield. The jagged remnants still trembling from the impact. The hood was dusted with splinters of broken glass, tiny shards reflecting the afternoon sun like scattered diamonds. The rock itself had bounced off, rolling a few feet across the pavement, its edges slick with the fine dust of impact. He should have expected it. He had seen the rage in Brad's eyes. The desperation in Lisa's. They had lost, and losing wasn't something they could accept. Weak people always lashed out when their pride was bruised. The problem was they had just made it personal. Jalan inhaled deeply, rolling his shoulders, forcing his heartbeat back into something even, something measured. He refused to let this get under his skin, refused to let them dictate his next move. His anger wasn't like theirs. It wasn't sloppy, reckless, unfocused. His anger was deliberate, and right now it was telling him to move. He pivoted smoothly, stepping toward his driver's side door, his boots crunching against stray bits of glass on the pavement. As soon as he opened it, he was greeted by a soft crystalline rain of fragments sliding off the edge of the doorframe, spilling across the leather interior. He let out a slow exhale, then reached inside, brushing the pieces off his seat with a firm sweep of his palm, feeling the sharp edges bite against his skin before scattering to the floor mat. He didn't even flinch. Once satisfied, he slid inside, adjusting his position slightly, listening to the faint crackle of remaining glass beneath his boots, his fingers wrapped around the wheel, steady, controlled, unshaken. The engine came to life with a low, smooth growl, the deep purr of finely tuned mechanics responding to his touch. He let it sit for a second, let himself breathe, let himself fully embrace the weight of the moment. Then, with a calm precision that was almost too composed, he shifted into gear. The second his tires hit the pavement, his focus narrowed, his body falling into a familiar state, a level of readiness he hadn't felt in a long time. His mind categorized the situation like a mission briefing. Targets in sight, vehicle in motion, pursuit initiated. No wasted movements, no unnecessary emotion, just action. The SUV had taken off toward the exit of the parking lot, weaving through slower moving cars, desperate to put as much distance between themselves and the consequences of their actions as possible. They thought they were escaping. They weren't. Jalen's grip on the wheel was firm but relaxed as he navigated out of his parking spot, cutting smoothly onto the main road without hesitation. The fractured windshield was a distraction, the cracks splintering across his field of vision, but he adjusted effortlessly, his gaze finding every available gap through the damage. Up ahead, the silver SUV was moving fast, reckless. Lisa undoubtedly screaming at Brad to go faster, to lose him, to make sure this didn't come back to bite them. But Jalen was already closing the distance, his foot pressing steadily on the gas, his instincts guiding him, every shift in speed, every lane change precise, calculated, effortless. His body remembered this. The chase, the focus, the heightened awareness. Brad was driving like a panicked fool, jerking the wheel too hard with every lane change. His speed erratic, his choices reactive rather than planned. Jalen, on the other hand, moved like water, smooth, flowing through traffic. Each decision made before the other driver even knew what was happening. It took less than a minute before he had them in his sights again. He could see them now, just a few cars ahead. Lisa's frantic silhouette visible in the passenger seat, her hands gesturing wildly as she screamed at Brad, no doubt telling him to drive faster, to go, go, go. Jalen let out a slow breath, rolling his neck slightly, feeling the tension ease rather than build. Because this was easy. They were predictable, panicked, sloppy, and they had no idea who they had just pissed off. The road stretched ahead, the sun starting its descent, long shadows stretching across the pavement, the hum of engines filling the space between him and his target. Jalen flicked his eyes to the rear-view mirror for half a second. Assessing traffic was steady, but not congested. There was room to move, to maneuver. Good. He tightened his grip just slightly. And then, with the calmness of a man who had already decided how this was going to end, he pressed down on the accelerator, his car surging forward, slicing through the space between him and them, the distance closing inch by inch. They could run, but they weren't going to get away. Jalen could feel the road beneath him. The subtle vibrations of his car responding to every flick of the wheel, every shift in speed, every deliberate maneuver. He wasn't just chasing them now. He was herding them. The SUV was still ahead, weaving erratically. Brad driving like a desperate animal backed into a corner, his fear overriding whatever scraps of logic he had left. He was making mistakes. His turns too sharp, his acceleration too uneven, his decision-making sloppy. Jalan, on the other hand, was flawless. He kept his distance just enough to avoid drawing attention from other drivers, but stayed close enough that Brad could feel him there, lurking just outside his comfort zone. He knew what that kind of pressure did to a man who had never been trained for it. It made them reckless. It made them stupid. Lisa must have been screaming in his ear, her silhouette still frantic in the passenger seat, her hands gesturing wildly. Jalan couldn't hear her, but he didn't need to. He knew exactly what was happening inside that car. She was panicking. Brad was trying to pretend he wasn't, but the truth was sinking in. They weren't getting away. Up ahead, the road split. A T intersection with only two options, left or right. Jalan had already made the decision for them. The right lane was clogged with traffic, leaving only one way to go. And Jalan, he was about to make sure that way led straight to disaster. He flicked his wheel just slightly, closing in on Brad's left side, positioning himself exactly where he needed to be. Brad saw it and he panicked. The SUV jerked violently to the right. Brad trying to swerve out of reach, but the split-second decision cost him. He didn't check his blind spot. Didn't even think to. And that was his final mistake. A car was already there. The driver honking loudly as Brad yanked the wheel, barely avoiding a side swipe. The overcorrection sent him veering hard to the left, his tires screeching as the SUV skidded across the intersection and straight into a concrete pole. The impact was sudden, violent, inevitable. The front end of the SUV crumpled against the pole with a deafening crash. The metal bending inward, the glass windshield spiderweb instantly as the vehicle jerked to a dead stop. The entire frame shuddered from the force of the collision. The hood crushed inward, smoke hissing from beneath it. For a moment, everything went still. Jalan eased off the gas, his car gliding forward smoothly, controlled as he approached the wreck. His breathing was steady, his grip on the wheel loose, but ready, his heartbeat calm. He didn't hesitate. He threw the car into park, stepped out, and moved. His boots hit the pavement hard, his stride purposeful, fluid, deadly. He didn't waste a second. Lisa was still screaming inside the SUV, clutching her face, her body shaking with shock and terror. Brad, however, he was alive. Alive, but dazed, his hands fumbling at the door handle, trying to push it open, trying to escape. Jalan got there first. With one swift movement, he ripped the door open. Brad barely had time to react before Jalan's hand was on him, and then he was out. Jalan yanked him from the wreckage like he weighed nothing, dragging him out of the SUV and onto the pavement in one fluid motion. Brad stumbled, his footing lost, his head still swimming from the crash. But Jalan didn't give him time to recover. The first punch landed hard. A precise, punishing shot straight to the ribs, knocking the wind from Brad's lungs before he could even process what was happening. The second came right after. A brutal, unrelenting strike to the stomach, forcing Brad to double over, gasping for air, choking on his own pain. Jalan didn't stop. He wasn't done. The next hit sent Brad crashing to the pavement, his body twisting as he groaned in agony, his hands scrabbling uselessly against the concrete as he tried, and failed to push himself back up. Jalan loomed over him, his presence casting a long dark shadow over the broken man beneath him. Brad coughed, his breath ragged, his body shaking, his hands trembling as he tried to crawl away. Jalan reached down, grabbed him by the collar, and hauled him back up. Brad's face was already a mess, his nose bleeding, his jaw swelling, his entire body sagging with defeat. His eyes red-rimmed, terrified, furious, darted up to meet Jalan's. But there was nothing left in them now. No confidence, no bravado, just fear. "You made a mistake," Jalan murmured, voice low, steady, absolute. Brad shook his head frantically, his lips parting, trying to speak, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of his pride. But Jalan was done listening. The final punch was the most precise of them all. A clean, devastating right hook straight to the jaw. Brad's head snapped violently to the side. His body went limp and then he dropped. Jalan let him hit the pavement face first, unconscious. Lisa's screech of horror cut through the thick air, her voice raw with shock and disbelief. Jalan turned, his gaze cold, meeting hers through the fractured windshield. She was frozen, her entire body locked in place, her hands pressed against the dashboard, her eyes wide with terror. For the first time, she wasn't yelling. For the first time, she was silent. And Jalan, he was still standing, unshaken, unbothered, unstoppable. Jalan exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as he looked down at Brad's limp, unconscious form, sprawled out on the pavement like discarded trash. The man wasn't dead, but he was definitely out cold. His face swollen, his body still twitching with the aftershocks of the beating he had just received. The rage that had burned hot in Jalan's chest earlier had cooled into something sharper now, something quieter, but just as deadly, a focused, unwavering sense of justice. This wasn't just about the shattered windshield or the parking lot brawl or the countless insults they had hurled at him as if he were less than human. No, this was about accountability, and Lisa Whitmore was next. He turned his gaze toward the SUV, his footsteps measured and deliberate. As he walked up to the passenger side through the spider-webbed cracks of the windshield, he could see her shaking, her entire body trembling, her hands gripping the dashboard so hard that her knuckles had turned bone white. For the first time, she wasn't yelling. For the first time, she wasn't demanding, wasn't accusing, wasn't screeching about how she was the victim and the world had wronged her. She was terrified. Jalan reached the door and yanked it open. Lisa let out a sharp gasp, her entire frame jolting backward against the seat, her breaths coming in short, panicked bursts as if she had just remembered how to breathe. Jalan didn't say anything at first, just watched her. His presence alone making her shrink back. Her entire demeanor shifting from the entitled aggressive woman who had started this mess to someone who finally realized she had picked the wrong person to mess with. Her lips parted, her voice cracking as she tried to pull together some semblance of control. I didn't do anything," she stammered, her words tumbling over themselves, desperate and uneven. This was all him. It was Brad, not me. You saw it? Everyone saw it? He's the one who threw the rock. Jalan raised a brow unimpressed. Yeah. And who told him to do it? Lisa flinched. I who attacked me first in that parking lot. He pressed, his voice still calm, still controlled, still cutting through the last scraps of her lies like a blade. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jalan didn't wait for her to try again. You're under citizen's arrest, he said, his tone firm and final. Lisa blinked, her head jerking forward like she had misheard him, her eyes wild and desperate now. What? She rasped, shaking her head, letting out a hysterical, broken laugh. You can't do that. You're not a cop. You can't just arrest me. Jalan tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into something that was almost a smirk. But not quite. I can, Lisa's breath hitched. You physically assaulted me, he continued, his voice slow, deliberate, ensuring every word landed with weight. You and your husband attacked me. You ran. You destroyed my property. You put people in danger by driving like lunatics. And now after all of that, you expect to just sit here and cry your way out of this? Lisa shook her head violently, her hands coming up in weak protest, as if that alone would undo everything. No, no, no. You don't understand, she sputtered, her words rushed and sloppy, her voice rising again. I was scared. I didn't know what was happening. You were acting aggressive. I get out of the car. Lisa froze. Jalen didn't ask twice. His hand shot forward, his grip firm but not cruel, and yanked her out of the passenger seat in one fluid, effortless motion. She let out a sharp cry, stumbling as her heels scraped against the pavement, her body barely staying upright, her hands pawed at his grip, her voice cracking into pure hysteria. "Let go of me!" she shrieked, her body twisting violently, trying to wrench herself free. Jalen barely reacted, his grip locking around her wrists, restraining her with the same ease he had restrained her before. Controlled, calculated, unshakable. She fought, but it was useless. Jalen simply adjusted his hold, turning her around, forcing her arms behind her back, his movements fluid, methodical. "You can't do this," she screeched, her voice raw, her body trembling with pure disbelief. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you. I'll Lisa Whitmore." Jalen cut her off, voice steady. "You are under citizen's arrest. You will remain here until the police arrive. You will not move. You will not fight. And you will not try to run. Because if you do," he leaned in just slightly, his voice a whisper now, dangerous in its calmness, "you won't like what happens next." Lisa's breath hitched, her struggles weakening. She had finally realized there was no way out. Jalen could feel her shaking now, her chest rising and falling in short, panicked bursts, her body still locked in resistance, but her spirit breaking. The moment had finally caught up to her. And then in the distance, sirens, faint at first, then growing louder, filling the street with an undeniable presence. The flashing blue and red glow of police lights cutting through the tension like a blade. Lisa turned her head slightly, her expression crumbling into something truly pathetic now, her lip trembling, her entire body sagging with the realization that this wasn't going to end the way she had always assumed it would. Jalen, still calm, still unshaken, simply adjusted his grip, his eyes locked on the approaching squad cars, his expression unreadable. This was it. This was justice, and Lisa Whitmore was about to face it in full. The first squad car screeched to a halt near the wreckage of the SUV, doors flying open before the officers even had the chance to fully assess the scene. Two uniformed officers stepped out quickly, hands on their belts, their eyes immediately locking onto the black man, restraining a sobbing white woman in the middle of the street. Jalen didn't need to hear the first command to know exactly what was coming next. "Sir, let her go and put your hands where we can see them." It wasn't a suggestion. Jalen felt the shift, the instant tension in the air, the way the officers' hands hovered near their holsters, their eyes narrowing as they took in the scene without all the necessary information. It didn't matter that Lisa's mascara-streaked face was twisted with fake tears or that Brad was still sprawled unconscious on the pavement a few feet away. They saw Jalen first, and he knew what that meant. He kept his breathing slow, his movements deliberate, and his voice measured. "This is a citizen's arrest, officer. She and her husband attacked me, and they've committed multiple crimes, including vandalism, assault, reckless endangerment, and fleeing the scene of a crime." Lisa let out a wretched sob, her body sagging dramatically, as if the weight of his hands alone had somehow crushed her. "He's lying. He's crazy. He's violent. He attacked my husband." The officers weren't listening to him anymore. One of them stepped closer, his other hand now resting on his holster, his voice sharper. "I said, let her go now." Jalen clenched his jaw, but he knew better than to argue. He released Lisa's wrists, raising his hands slowly, his posture calm, but unmistakably firm, the way a soldier would when diffusing a volatile situation. Lisa stumbled forward dramatically, immediately, clutching at one of the officers as if she had just been rescued from a kidnapping. He hurt me. He tried to kill my husband," she wailed, her entire body shaking as she buried herself into the officer's side, her fingers gripping his uniform like she had just survived some horrific ordeal. Jalen stood his ground, his expression unreadable, his hands still raised slightly, but his shoulders squared. He could see the way the officers processed her words, how easily they believed her. One of them turned toward him, stepping closer, a pair of cuffs in his hand. "Sir, turn around and put your hands behind your back." For the first time, Jalan felt his patience slip. "I didn't do anything wrong." The officer's jaw tightened. "Sir, we'll sort this out, but I need you to comply." Lisa sniffled loudly, nodding rapidly, her hands still clutching at the officer like he was her personal bodyguard. "He's dangerous. He's a thug. He just started attacking us out of nowhere." That's a lie." The new voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Lisa's rambling stopped. The officers hesitated. Jalan turned slightly toward the source. A man had stepped forward from the growing crowd, mid-40s, tall, wearing a dark polo with a name tag clipped to the front, the store manager. And in his hands, a phone, the screen still lit up. A video paused mid-frame. He lifted it slightly, his voice calm, but commanding. "I saw the whole thing, and so did my cameras." Lisa went rigid. The officers turned toward him, their postures shifting, their eyes flicking to the phone. Jalan said nothing. He just watched. "I have footage from our parking lot cameras," the manager continued, stepping closer, his voice now carrying the kind of authority that demanded to be heard. "And I've got about a dozen videos from customers who recorded the whole thing." One of the officers frowned, glancing at the phone. "What exactly are we looking at?" The manager held it up, pressed play, and suddenly everything changed. Lisa's own voice played back at full volume, her shrieking insults spewing racist vitriol, slapping Jalan, attacking him first, threatening him, telling Brad to teach him a lesson. The videos captured everything. Brad charging like a reckless idiot, swinging wildly, Lisa joining in them both losing. It was undeniable. Jalan saw the exact moment the officers realized they had made a mistake. One of them shifted uncomfortably, his grip loosening around his cuffs, his jaw clenching slightly as he processed it all. Lisa's breath was coming faster now, her face pale, her hands trembling, her entire act falling apart in real time. Brad was still unconscious, unable to dig her out of this one. She opened her mouth, her voice weaker now. "That's not," the officer cut her off, turning toward her. "Ma'am, step away from me." Lisa's face crumbled. The other officer, the one who had been about to cuff Jalan just moments ago, turned toward him instead. "Sir, I apologize. We had limited information when we arrived. It looks like you were acting in self-defense." Jalan didn't move, didn't relax, didn't say you were ready to arrest me without any proof, even though he wanted to. Instead, he just nodded. "That's correct." The first officer was already turning toward Lisa, who was now backing up, her eyes darting between them all, looking for an escape. But there wasn't one. "Lisa Whitmore. You're under arrest for assault, inciting violence, and reckless endangerment." Lisa let out a choked sob. Her entire body shaking violently now, her hands lifting in protest. But it was too late. The cuff snapped onto her wrists. Jalan watched, expression unreadable. Lisa Whitmore stood there, her hands cuffed behind her back, her chest heaving, her breath ragged as the weight of her new reality finally started to sink in. The officers flanked her, their expressions unreadable but firm, their patience clearly wearing thin after watching her unravel. She had spent the last 10 minutes trying to talk her way out of this, cycling through every desperate tactic, pleading, crying, insisting this was all a misunderstanding, even attempting to blame Brad for everything. None of it had worked. She had been caught, exposed, publicly humiliated. And the worst part for her, Jalan Bennett was still standing there unshaken, watching it all unfold with the quiet, unbothered ease of a man who had won before the fight had even begun. That was what made her snap. Jalan could see it happen. The exact moment her expression twisted into something venomous, something ugly, something even more unhinged than before. The sobs stopped instantly, her eyes sharpening, her body going rigid, her mouth pressing into a thin, trembling line before she exploded. "You think you're better than me," she shrieked, her voice raw, wild, a desperate attempt to regain control of something she had long since lost. Jalan exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as he tilted his head slightly, giving her a long, uninterested look. "Oh, I don't think I'm better than you," he said, his tone smooth, casual, utterly unimpressed. "I know I am." The second the words left his mouth, Lisa lost whatever was left of her self-control. She lunged forward, trying to close the distance between them, her body twisting violently against the restraints, her face contorted with pure, unfiltered rage. "You filthy low-life thug," she shrieked, her voice cracking with the sheer force of her hate. "You don't belong here. You don't belong in this country. You don't belong around decent people. You're a nobody. A disgusting monkey." The words hit the air like a slap. The sheer venom in them staining the atmosphere, making even the police officers flinch. The small crowd that had stayed behind watching the scene unfold collectively inhaled a stunned silence falling over the street. But Jalan just smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It wasn't a smirk. It wasn't even amused. It was the kind of smile a man gave when he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the person in front of him had just dug their own grave. He took a step forward, slow, deliberate, watching as Lisa instinctively tried to step back, her body still fighting against the cuffs, her balance nearly failing. She looked so small now. Jalan let the moment stretch. Let her breathe in the final gasps of power she thought she still had before he sealed her fate completely. "You done?" he asked, voice calm. Lisa's chest heaved, her mouth still open, her rage still boiling over, but she had nothing left. No more excuses, no more manipulation, no more games. Jalan let out a slow breath, straightening, adjusting his stance slightly before saying what he knew would crush whatever delusions she had left. "You know what, Lisa?" His voice was almost amused now, like he was just thinking out loud. "I wasn't even going to press charges." Lisa froze. Jalan let the words sink in, watching as her lips parted slightly, as her entire frame seemed to lock in place. "But now," he continued, his voice still maddeningly calm, casual, almost bored. "Now, I think I'd be doing the world a favor if I made sure you paid for every last thing you did." The moment stretched. And then she lost it. "No, you can't. You can't do this," Lisa screamed, thrashing violently, yanking against the cuffs, her entire body convulsing with rage and panic. "I am a good woman. I am a tax-paying citizen. I have a family. You can't do this to me." Jalan just shrugged. "Should have thought about that before you went full racism rally in a parking lot." Lisa screamed, her voice raw, shrieking slurs, curses, anything she could throw at him. Anything that could break the unshakable, unmovable wall that was Jalan Bennett, but nothing worked. Jalan had already won. One of the officers sighed heavily, rubbing his temple before turning Lisa around and forcing her toward the squad car. "You had every chance to shut up, lady." Lisa kept screaming, kicking wildly, trying to fight against the inevitable. Jalan didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even react. He just watched as they shoved her into the back seat, slamming the door shut behind her, muffling her shrieks into a garbled mess of outrage and hopelessness. The other officer let out a breath before stepping toward him, clearing his throat. "You sure you want to press charges?" Jalan glanced at the squad car, listening to the muffled wails of a woman who had spent her entire life thinking she would never face consequences. Then, with perfect clarity, he nodded. "Oh, absolutely. Jalan stood outside the police station, his arms crossed loosely over his chest, his stance relaxed, his expression unreadable as he watched the officers escort Lisa Whitmore through the front doors. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a sterile glow across the tiled floor, making the moment feel strangely surreal. Lisa's screams had died down into pathetic, shaking sobs. Her energy spent, her throat raw from her earlier outburst. She had fought. She had denied. She had begged. None of it had mattered. Now she was just another suspect being booked. Just another name on a police report. Just another criminal facing the consequences of her own actions. And Jalan, he was at peace with that. "All right," one of the officers said, stepping back toward him, adjusting the notepad in his hand. "Just to confirm, Mr. Bennett, you're pressing charges for assault, harassment, vandalism, and reckless endangerment. You're also filing for damages regarding your vehicle, correct?" Jalan nodded once, his voice steady. "That's right." The officer, a middle-aged man with the slightly exhausted look of someone who had dealt with too many people like Lisa Whitmore, let out a slow breath. "Can't say I blame you. You're well within your rights. And given everything on video, I don't think she's got a leg to stand on." Jalan didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. He had already won this fight long before they ever set foot in the station. Lisa had sealed her own fate the moment she decided to attack him. The moment she had turned on the theatrics, convinced that her tears and skin color would shield her from justice. She had counted on the system to protect her. Instead, it had turned against her husband. Jalan asked, shifting his gaze toward the holding cells in the back. "What's happening with him?" The officer glanced at his notes. "Brad Whitmore is still unconscious, but paramedics checked him out. He's fine, just took a nasty hit. He'll wake up in the next couple of hours with a bruised ego and a hell of a headache. His charges will mirror his wife's, but we're also tacking on resisting arrest and destruction of property. That rock through your windshield, that alone carries a decent fine, and depending on how the judge sees it, possible jail time." Jalan exhaled, nodding slightly. Good. Brad had always been a coward, a man who relied on size and aggression to intimidate people, a man who had never actually faced a real fight in his life until today. And now he was just a knocked-out fool sitting in a cell, waiting for his turn to wake up and realized the nightmare hadn't ended. Jalan glanced at the officer, and their defense, the officer let out a short, dry laugh. "If they're smart, they'll plead guilty and try for a reduced sentence." But given how he acted earlier, he shook his head. "Wouldn't be surprised if she doubles down." Jalan smirked slightly because, yeah, that sounded about right. Lisa wasn't the type to admit defeat. She would claw, she would bite, she would try to paint herself as the victim until her very last breath, but it wouldn't work. Not this time. Jalan had made sure of that. "All right," the officer said, flipping his notepad shut. "Your lawyer will be in contact with the DA's office, but given the evidence, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. If you need to submit any further documentation, our department will be handling your case file, so just reach out directly." Jalan nodded once. "Appreciate it." With that, the officer gave him a brief nod, then stepped away, disappearing down the hall. Jalan stood there for a moment longer, letting the weight of everything settle over him. Not in a way that burdened him, but in a way that reminded him just how much power came with standing your ground. This could have ended differently if he had lost his temper. If he had swung first, if he had let them dictate the narrative, but he hadn't. And now they were sitting in holding cells awaiting formal charges. And he was walking free. He stepped outside, the cool night air hitting his skin, the city buzzing faintly in the background. His car was still a wreck, the shattered windshield riffles. The world wasn't what it used to be. This wasn't some backroom incident where their actions would be forgotten. This was on video. It would be everywhere. And the people they knew, their neighbors, their co-workers, their friends, they would all see it. Jalen exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Some people just never learned. Pulling out his phone, he tapped his lawyer's number, lifting it to his ear as he walked toward the street. "Hey," he said as soon as the call connected. "Yeah, it's done. File the paperwork first thing in the morning. I want this." Handled quickly, a pause, then a chuckle from the other end. "Yeah, you already know." Jalen smirked, ending the call. This was justice, and he was going to make sure Lisa and Brad felt every ounce of it. Jalen sat back in his chair, fingers tapping idly against the side of his coffee cup as he scrolled through his phone, watching the world react in real time. The story had already begun to spread faster than even he had anticipated, latching onto every social media platform, making its way into online discussions, news segments, and local gossip circles. He wasn't surprised. There was nothing people loved more than watching entitled fools destroy themselves. And Lisa and Brad Whitmore, they had given the world a spectacle. The first video had dropped within hours, shot from multiple angles, edited together seamlessly by someone online who clearly had a talent for exposing people. It started with Lisa's parking lot meltdown, her racist tirade captured in painful clarity, and cut between footage of her slapping Jalen, her egging Brad on, their ridiculous attempt to flee, and their ultimate downfall. The audio was crystal clear. Every insult, every lie, every mistake. And it had gone viral. Jalen scrolled past thousands of comments. Some mocking, some furious, some just stunned by the sheer stupidity of it all. White lady really thought she could slap a Navy SEAL and walk away. The way she flipped from racist screeching to victim mode the second she got restrained. Classic. Her husband getting knocked out in 0.5 seconds will never not be funny. Imagine losing your job, your reputation, and probably your house because you couldn't handle losing a parking spot. Jalen let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. People aren't just watching this, they were devouring it. Lisa and Brad's names were everywhere now, being dragged across every social media platform, news site, and forum. Their faces were being turned into memes, their meltdowns dissected, their downfall celebrated. And then, of course, came the real-world consequences. He took another sip of coffee, his phone vibrating in his hand as another message came in from his lawyer. Whitmore's employer just released a statement. They fired her, Jalen smirked, tapping the link. Official statement from Westridge. Really effective immediately. Lisa Whitmore is no longer employed with Westridge really. Our company does not tolerate discrimination or hateful behavior of any kind. The actions displayed in the widely circulated video do not reflect our values and we have terminated her position accordingly. Jalen shook his head. Exhaling slowly. She was done. Real estate was oiled on reputation, on trust, on public image. No one was going to hire a woman whose face was now synonymous with bigotry and delusion. And Brad Jalen swiped to another article, already knowing what he'd find. Local construction manager Brad Whitmore terminated following viral altercation. He schemed the article, already anticipating the corporate PR distancing itself from him. In light of recent events, Danning & Sons Construction has severed ties with Brad Whitmore. Effective immediately, we take these matters seriously and hold our employees to the highest standard of conduct, both on and off the job. Jalen let out a low hum of satisfaction. That was 2 careers obliterated in less than 24 hours. They had stepped into this mess thinking they could do whatever they wanted, believing they were untouchable. They had assumed the world would back them, that their privilege would protect them. They had been wrong. Jalen leaned back in his chair, letting his mind drift for a moment, watching as more headlines flooded in, more statements, more social media clips, more pieces of their lives unraveling. Lisa was officially blacklisted from her field. No brokerage, no firm would touch her now. Her face was too recognizable. Her name too toxic. Brad was finished in construction. No site manager, no foreman wanted the headache of someone whose presence would only bring bad press. And their neighbors, their so-called friends, their entire social circle, they had all turned their backs. Jalan clicked on a local community Facebook page, his gaze flicking over the comments. She used to be in the PTA. Not anymore. She got booted this morning. Somebody egged their house last night. Their kids aren't even showing up to school. Must be too embarrassed. Jalan exhaled slowly, letting the reality settle in. This was what accountability looked like. Not just a slap on the wrist, not just a fine or an apology statement. Real tangible consequences. Lisa and Brad Whitmore had built their lives on the assumption that they could do whatever they wanted, say whatever they wanted, hurt whoever they wanted without ever facing repercussions. And now they were learning the hardest lesson of all. Jalan leaned forward, setting his cup down, his gaze flicking toward the city skyline in the distance. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about every person who had ever been in his position. Every person who had stayed quiet, who had walked away, who had taken the abuse because they knew the system was stacked against them. Jalan had stood his ground, and the world had seen it. This wasn't justice. This was an example, and Lisa and Brad, they would never escape it. Jalan sat in the polished wooden chair of the courthouse hallway, his posture relaxed, hands resting loosely in his lap, his eyes half focused on the door ahead. The legal process had moved faster than expected, expedited by the overwhelming evidence, the video footage, the witness statements, and perhaps most importantly, the media storm that had erupted around the case. The world had watched. The world had judged. And the world was about to see it all come to an end. His lawyer, a sharp-witted woman in a tailored navy suit, stood beside him, tapping absently at her tablet. As she glanced over the case files, she didn't look nervous. She didn't look uncertain. If anything, she looked bored, as if the outcome was so inevitable that sitting through the proceedings was merely a formality. And it was the moment the judge had received the full unedited footage of the parking lot incident, the police chase, the physical assaults, and the racist meltdown that followed. There hadn't been much left for the defense to argue. Brad had pleaded no contest to his charges. Lisa, on the other hand, she had tried everything. Claimed the videos were misleading, claimed she had been provoked, even claimed that Jalan had somehow manipulated the situation into making her look bad. None of it had worked because the truth was ugly, raw, and undeniable. And now, as the final court session neared its end, the door in front of him finally swung open. Jalan stood slowly, stepping into the courtroom, his gaze locking onto Lisa and Brad, who sat at the defendant's table. They looked nothing like the people he had encountered in that parking lot. Lisa's usual prim confidence had been stripped away, her hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun, her face pale and gaunt, her once perfect nails chewed down. She wasn't wearing the stylish, pristine outfits she had once flaunted. Today she wore something plain, something that blended into the background, something that tried to make her look smaller. Brad, sitting beside her, was worse. His jaw still bore the faint bruises from their last encounter. His posture slumped, his eyes tired, he looked exhausted. Defeated, Jalan took his seat, barely sparing them another glance. The judge adjusted her glasses, her expression unreadable as she shuffled through the final case notes. The murmurs in the courtroom died down as she cleared her throat and addressed the room. After reviewing all presented evidence, including multiple first-hand witness accounts, video documentation, and prior statements made by both defendants, the court finds Lisa and Brad Whitmore guilty on all charges. Lisa's sharp inhalation echoed through the room. Brad's head dropped forward, his fingers curling into fists on the table. The judge continued, her voice level but firm. Lisa Whitmore is hereby sentenced to 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. She will also be required to attend court-mandated racial sensitivity training, and a restraining order will be placed between her and the plaintiff. Mr. Jalen Bennett. Lisa's breath was coming too fast now. Shallow, uneven, her eyes darting wildly around the room as if there was still some way to escape the inevitable. Jalen, he didn't react because this was exactly what she deserved. The judge didn't stop there. Brad Whitmore is sentenced to 1 year in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. His additional charges for resisting arrest and destruction of property carry monetary fines, which he will be required to pay to the plaintiff in full. Jalen's lawyer shifted slightly beside him, a small, knowing smile flickering across her lips. Because that wasn't all. The court has also ruled in favor of Mr. Bennett's civil lawsuit for damages, including full restitution for property destruction, emotional distress, and legal fees. The defendants are required to pay the sum of $75,000 in damages. Lisa let out a strangled noise, half sob, half protest, but the judge barely acknowledged it. This is a final ruling. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Lisa collapsed into her chair, her shoulders shaking, her mouth moving in silent, desperate words. Brad, silent and unmoving, didn't even look up. Jalen, for the first time since this all started, allowed himself to truly exhale. It was over. The court officers approached Lisa and Brad, instructing them to stand, their fates now completely out of their own hands. Lisa was still whispering something. This isn't fair. This isn't happening. I didn't do anything wrong. But no one was listening. Brad moved like a man resigned to his fate. His hands extended as the cuffs were placed around his wrists. The reality of his sentence, finally crushing the last of whatever defiance he had left. As they were led toward the exit, Lisa finally looked at Jalen. There was nothing left in her eyes now but pure empty despair. Jalen simply tilted his head slightly, offering her one last unreadable look. He didn't need to say anything. She knew. She knew that she had lost. She knew that she would never escape this. She knew that no matter where she went, no matter what she did, she would be known as the woman who lost everything because she couldn't accept that a black man had beaten her to a parking spot. Jalen turned away because she wasn't his problem anymore. As he stepped outside, the air was cool, fresh, free. He pulled out his phone. Another notification popping up. A deposit confirmation from his lawyer. Brad and Lisa's bank accounts had already been drained to start paying him. Jalen smirked slightly. This was justice, and he had earned every second of it. Jalen adjusted the sleeve of his jacket, exhaling slowly as he stepped out of the dealership, the crisp air settling comfortably against his skin. The weight of the keys in his palm felt right, earned, like a symbol of everything that had led to this moment. The sleek new vehicle sitting in front of him gleamed under the soft glow of the overhead lights. The deep black finish smooth as glass, reflecting his own calm expression back at him. It had been a long time coming. The lawsuit had wrapped up quickly. Brad and Lisa forced to liquidate assets, their accounts drained to cover the settlement. Jalen hadn't needed their money. Not really. But there was something deeply satisfying about using their own arrogance to fund his new ride. He stepped forward, running his fingers over the hood of the car, appreciating the unblemished perfection of it. No cracks, no shattered glass, no reminder of a thrown rock fueled by bitterness and hate, just clean, untouched victory. He slid into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors, inhaling the scent of fresh leather and quiet triumph. The engine hummed to life, smooth and strong, the kind of sound that promised freedom. He tapped his fingers against the wheel, letting the satisfaction settle in his chest before pulling out of the lot. It would have been easy to leave everything behind, to never think about them again. But there was one last stop to make. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The drive was steady, fluid, his hands loose on the wheel, his body relaxed in a way it hadn't been in weeks. The city lights flickered past, the hum of the world moving around him, but he wasn't in a hurry because he already knew what he was going to find as he pulled onto the familiar street. He spotted the house instantly. It looked different. Not physically, not on the outside, but there was something off about it now, something hollow, like the pride that had once existed there had been stripped away, leaving only resentment and anger in its wake. The front lawn, once neatly trimmed and meticulously maintained, had started to brown around the edges, patches of neglect creeping in like a slow, inevitable decay. And inside, Jalan smirked as he heard them before he even saw them. The argument was loud, heated, unfiltered rage pouring through the thin walls of their overpriced suburban prison. "I told you to shut up," Brad's voice boomed, thick with frustration and exhaustion. "You just had to keep running your mouth. You just couldn't let it go. And now look at us. Look at us, Lisa. What the hell are we supposed to do now?" Lisa's voice followed immediately, shrill, raw, desperate. "Oh, so this is my fault," she screeched, her words barely holding together, her breath ragged from weeks of relentless consequences. "I didn't throw the damn rock, Brad. You did that. You're the one who got knocked out like a little loser on camera. Don't you dare put this on me." Jalan leaned back slightly, resting his elbow against the window frame, his fingers tapping idly against the door as he listened. It was predictable. Of course, they were turning on each other now. People like them always did when the world stopped excusing their behavior. Brad's voice grew even angrier, a heavy slamming sound echoing through the house as he punched something. Probably a wall, maybe a table, maybe just the air. Trying to feel strong again. "Oh, don't start with that bullshit," he roared, his voice breaking at the edges. "I lost everything because of you. My job, my reputation. Do you know what people are saying about us? Do you know what they call us now?" Lisa's response was instant, unhinged. "You think I don't know? You think I don't hear it every single time I step outside? I can't even go to the grocery store without people looking at me like I'm a monster," Brad laughed bitterly. The kind of laugh that came from a man who had finally realized just how badly he had lost. "You are a monster," he muttered darkly. Silence and then a loud, sharp crash, as if Lisa had thrown something. Jalan chuckled, shaking his head slightly. It had only just begun for them. They were never going to escape this. Not in a year, not in 5 years, not ever. Their names were etched into history as cautionary tales. Their faces burned into every corner of the internet. Their careers, their reputations, their lives completely, utterly wrecked. Jalan didn't hate them. They weren't worth hating. They were just another reminder that some people don't know when to stop, when to walk away, when to let go of their own entitlement before it buries them. And now they were buried. He let out a slow breath, shaking his head slightly before pressing down on the gas, pulling away from the curb, leaving them behind in their own self-inflicted destruction. The road stretched ahead, open, wide, his future untouched by their failures. He didn't need to look back because he had already.